Let's discuss the relationship between WCAG and the European Accessibility Act. Now, when we look through the directive, there are no mentions of WCAG or the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, but we nevertheless see the footprints of WCAG inside the language of this directive. And we'll get to that in a moment. But for now, on the screen with me, I have a blog post titled Crushing WCAG and the European Accessibility Act. And so we're going to go through this post, and I will link to it in the description, but we're going to go through this post and I'm going to explain the relationship between WCAG and the European Accessibility Act. Now, the first part I want to cover are the relevant sections of the European Accessibility Act, and those are the under Article 2, scope, and then Annex 1 and Annex 2, which are at the bottom of the directive, which are going to tell us one, the actual technical accessibility requirements, and then two, Annex 2 is going to give us the examples of these technical requirements. And so these are very helpful examples. So let's actually tab over to the directive, and I have Article 2 pulled up. And so this tells us the products and services that the Act covers. And so I'm not going to name off everything now, but we can see that there are many different types of products and services listed. And the products are listed first, and then it's followed by the services. All right, so now going back to the blog post, we're going to consider web assets. So what are web assets? Well, websites, web applications, and really anything that can be accessed by a web browser, those are web assets. And the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines specifically covers web assets. So we're in good shape there. So when we look back at the directive, we can see already, just not even looking very closely, we see websites mentioned, we see e-commerce services mentioned, and we can go beyond there. But the point is that web assets are a part of this. So if you would like a really strong reference for knowing how to make your web assets accessible, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines are going to be excellent standards to look at. Now, what version should you use? Well, I would recommend WCAG 2.1 AA, and it's not the most recent version, but it does provide for a comprehensive level of accessibility, and 2.1 AA has been incorporated into the EN 301-549 European Standard for Accessibility. So that's important, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. And then we're also going to contemplate non-web assets. So the example here would be software and native mobile apps. And if we tab back over to the scope, we can see software and we can see mobile applications listed as well. So for non-web assets, some really good news is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines are still extremely helpful. In fact, the W3C, the developers of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, they actually put out an overview that explains it's really guidance on how to apply the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines to non-web information and communications technologies. So this guide is going to help shore up any inconsistencies because we have web assets and now we have non-web assets. So it's a really helpful guide. I've linked to it in the blog post. And what all of this means is that for digital assets, so for software, for mobile apps, for web apps, for websites, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines are a really helpful reference. Now, because of the way the EAA is written, we don't see the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines incorporated or adopted wholesale. So that takes us away from this strict conformance, which a lot of laws get into. So now we're not at strict conformance. It's just like now we truly have a reference that we can look to when making our assets, when we're working on our assets so they meet these technical standards, technical requirements in the directive. All right, so I'm going to continue scrolling on down, and then we have a section EN 301-549. So this is a European standard, and what it does is it sets out the ways that you can make your ICT, so your information and communications technology, the ways that you can make your ICT accessible and to where they are conformant with the European standard. So this is a harmonized standard that already supports European Directive 2016/2102 on the accessibility of websites and mobile applications. But it has not yet been updated so that it is harmonized with the European Accessibility Act. And that's something that we're waiting on. But what is of note is that EN 301549 incorporated/adopted WCAG 2.1 AA. So we see that technical standard incorporated into EN 301549. And so again, that tells you the web content accessibility guidelines are very helpful. And when we are looking to work through the technical requirements, it's this documentation is going to really help us with understanding what we need to do to meet the technical requirements in the EAA because we have these standards. But it's not perfect. Just because your products and services meet the technical accessibility criteria set out in EN 301549, it doesn't mean that you have a presumption of conformity. So it's important to keep that in mind, but hold on to that thought and we're going to come back to that. Now, when we get to physical accessibility and what we see in the scope for the European Accessibility Act is we see a lot of hybrid products. So when I say hybrid products, let's go ahead and scroll up here. Like a ticketing machine, an automated teller machine, check-in machines, payment terminals. These are all instances where we have a hybrid combination of physical and digital. So obviously this is going to go beyond the web content accessibility guidelines. So we can't just completely rely on the web content accessibility guidelines. So that's important to keep in mind. The EAA covers more than just digital assets. It covers hardware and other physical items, including some of the hybrid items that I just went over. But remember that we still have Annex 1, and that's going to tell us the technical accessibility requirements. And then we still have Annex 2, which is going to provide very helpful examples. Now, this won't do everything for us, right? And even with Annex 2, sometimes there aren't examples for every single requirement. But this is already going to provide us some nice coverage. And then when we don't have the full coverage, then that's when we can look out to EN 301549, which leads me to what I was about to talk about earlier, is we have version 4.1.1 of EN 301549 that is currently in the works. So right now, as of 2025, this is something that is coming, but the timing is curious because it's likely that we're going to see this new version published after the June 28, 2025 deadline. What you may be able to do, you may be able to get an advanced copy of a draft of this version 4.1.1 and then use that to help guide your efforts if you need additional supplemental information. Because there are already drafts in place, it's just not been finalized. And of course, this is going to be an exhaustive process where we have this final document. So it's going to take a while for us to get to that point. But just know that that's something that's being worked on. And then once we have this updated version of 301549, if you are conformant with the criteria in it, it will create a presumption of conformity. So again, this is expected in 2025, but we don't know exactly when. You can check on the scheduling. And so actually, let's look at that now because I have that pulled up. This is what I have here. So this is the work item schedule. And this is linked from the etsi.org website. And so here we see there's a stable draft, and it's what do we have here? The target date is 2025, February 9th, and it says achieved, it says it was achieved on Christmas Eve, so December 24th, 2024. And then we see that there are many other drafts, and it's just more rounds of approvals that needs to happen before we have this final copy. But we already have stable drafts, and have been multiple rounds of stable drafts. So like I said, this is something that If you log into a portal, if you have access to the portal, I think you can download a draft. I do not have access to this portal, but the important part here is that there are drafts. If you can potentially get a hold of this, then you can start working from this advanced draft. Obviously, it won't be final, but it would be nice information to have. So going back to the blog post, we have that. And then one more thing I wanted to cover was the WCAG principles. And I talked earlier about how you can see the footprint of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines in the directive. So one thing to note about the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines is they are built on 4 principles. And here we see the POUR acronym, which stands for perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. So that's what we're trying to do when we are making our web assets and extending that our digital assets accessible. We're trying to make sure that they are perceivable, they are operable, they are understandable, and robust. And when we look at Annex 1, we can see this language coming through with in the very first section, the very first, in the first requirement. It says requirements on the provision of information. It continues on. And then we see letter 2, subletter 2, and subletter 3. It says presented in an understandable way. Subletter 3 says presented to users in ways they can perceive. We see this being repeated throughout Annex 1. And then when we continue on down Annex 1, and I'm not going to read out the sections, but just know it's under Section 3, we see this excerpt. Providing electronic information needed in the provision of the service in a consistent and adequate way by making it perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. Now, where do you think those 4 words came from, right? That's from the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Looking at subsection C under Section 3, making websites including the related online applications and mobile device-based services, including mobile applications, accessible in a consistent and adequate way by making them perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. Again, we see the footprints of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines shining through. So if you're unsure how to make your web and digital assets accessible, here you go, right? The Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, we can take the success criteria, bring them forward, and try to make it so that our web and digital assets are fully conformant, ideally and optimally. But one of the really nice things about the European Accessibility Act is because it doesn't wholesale incorporate the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, strict conformance is not necessary. So I've covered this. This is what I wanted to cover. This is how you can relate the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines with the European Accessibility Act. Now you have a really good idea of what to keep in mind for possibly now if you can get a hold of the copy, but also in the future, there's going to be an update. We're going to have a new version of EN 301549, and then we can work from EN 301549 to likely have a presumption of conformity if we meet the standard that is set out in version 4.1.1. But as of now, EN 301549 is still a really helpful reference to help you work through the technical requirements. So I'm going to link to this blog post in the description. And if you need help with meeting these technical requirements under the European Accessibility Act, accessible.org offers a number of services, including consulting and audits and remediation, and the list goes on. We also offer training. I will include a link to our WCAG course in the description. This course is going to train your team on the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. This is essential knowledge, not only for right now as you are trying to meet the technical requirements, but also going forward, because you need to make sure that you are creating accessible products and services to begin with. And so you need to implement the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines into your process so that it's not a disjointed process where you are working on updates or working on new products and then having to make them accessible. And obviously, it's ideal if you can incorporate incorporate accessibility into your processes ahead of time. So at the very least, when you have your final product or service, there may be a few accessibility issues, but not many, and that's going to greatly reduce your costs and then your amount of time involved. So I will link to all of those resources in the description.